there. Welcome to Rested Mamas Talk. We're Chelsae
and Mica, your certified pediatric sleep coaches who were once exhausted mamas just like you turned into rested mamas who now have helped hundreds of families get better sleep in 3 days with an alternative to traditional sleep training.
As creators of the Association Fading Sleep Method, we teach a responsive and holistic approach. Our podcast is dedicated to sharing the journey from true parental exhaustion to thriving parenthood.
From real sleep tips from us and other experts to real stories of families just like you.
Let's get rested. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Rested Mamas Talk. I am Chelsae, and I have my amazing partner here, Mica. How are you doing today?
Oh, we're feeling feisty today.
We are feeling a little feisty today. We're just going to chat today, you guys. And so kick us off, Mica, what is our main topic? Because this is actually something I honestly probably talk about with almost every single one of our clients. So what is it today?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that this wasn't one of our first. And it kind of aligns a little bit of how you can feel a little feisty as a parent with this topic. And it impacts your decision making on how you even move forward with sleep. And that is about daycare. So if you haven't already watched our webinar, we talk a little bit about the 4 pieces that you absolutely need to have in place if you decide to sleep train, whether you use our sleep training method, whether you use something else. And the number one question that always pops up is, am I even going to be successful if my child goes to daycare and I don't have any control over that? And it comes in different flavors because, first of all, the answer is yes. Spoiler alert. We're going to talk a little bit about our experiences and why it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But that's the topic for the day. Daycare, sleep, how it impacts your child's nights, and how it impacts, I guess, some decisions on whether you should sleep train or not.
Yeah. And I think that and kind of as a secondary question, or, question that we frequently get with our clients is like, can this approach even work? Like, is that something that we can even do? Right. And so, one of the things that I wanted to go over first is, what is the main concern, I think, behind some of those questions? And that is primarily around the topic of really, truly just being consistent, right? Because that's something that we talk about all the time with our clients is, within this process and when we go through sleep training, one of the best things that we can do for our child is staying consistent. And so that's where that question is coming from, because obviously you don't have control over the day when your child is in daycare, or even if your child is with a nanny, right? So even though you may have a little bit more of a say, if you have a kiddo with a nanny, there is, you're not doing it, right? You're not with them all day. And so, Mica, when they say that to you, kind of how do you kind of help them to understand where that balance then lies going into the process, and kind of for them to know what to think about as they're moving forward in those initial steps?
If I could only give one answer, because I could probably give a million, is that your child is so smart and they actually know the difference of whether they are at home or whether they are at daycare or with a nanny. And so just overall, when you think about the life of your naps, they actually do figure it out. It's very unlikely that we ever see a family have really disrupted nights at daycare, and just for those nights at home, it's really bad. In fact, it's opposite. We actually have families where they're like, hey, naps at daycare are kind of crap.
Right.
But he's still sleeping 11 hours. Do I care? And
Yeah.
honestly, we are going to control what we can control, and if sleep at home is okay, then that's great. Now, that's assuming that you've already kind of gone through things. So the answer of does it work, or will you be able to keep good sleep afterwards if you can't control daycare? Yes, you absolutely can, and I promise you're so smart. But Chelsae, I'm going to pass it back to you. What's another thing that you would mention about daycare and sleep, maybe for a family who is like, I am just trying to find the right time during a break because I feel like I can't even sleep train if I'm gonna be working, and my child's gonna be in daycare.
So, one of the first things that I say to our clients and also talk about, like, previous experiences, like, this is what this client did and this worked really well, or this is what we find works really well. Please know, you guys, like, if you're listening to this, like, you do not need to take off 2 weeks of time to sleep train your child. Truly, and this is something that Mica, we talk about a lot, is that it really only takes about 3 days for you to help your child change their sleeping habits. And so, really, what my biggest recommendation is that going into the process, I always say, okay, let's really kick off everything in terms of applying your sleep training method to help them to fall asleep independently on a weekend. So for example, let's either do it on like a Thursday night to start or a Friday night. So then you also then have that daytime Saturday, Sunday, obviously depending on your work schedule. If you kind of work more of like a Wednesday to a Tuesday, then, whatever your off days are, then you can really focus with that consistency for your child when they are at home at the onset of the process, because then what happens is that your babies, like Mika was saying, are very smart. And one of the things that we highly recommend is to start to get into a really good, consistent nap time routine. And I'm not talking about the times that your child is going to sleep, but rather those little things, those steps that you do with your child to help them transition into a nap time. So, for example, changing the diaper and then reading a quick book, singing a song, and then putting your child down. And if you're staying really diligent about that, particularly in the beginning, your child is going to start to really pick up on those cues for sleep, even just after 2 days. Okay. And so if you can get them on a good, I guess, footing, a good little foundation, and then now, this is kind of where the second part comes in, Mika, is then how do we then help your child carry that over to daycare? So for you, okay, let's go back actually to ourselves with our kids. So as you guys may know, we are each moms. I have 2 children. Mika has 2 children. We both each have a child right now in daycare. And what were the big kind of things that you would always convey to daycare about your child's nap time routines, or just in general? Like, what were some of the big, like, need to know things that you would always communicate with your child care provider?
Yeah, so, I try to control as much as I can of my child's sleep, even though actually after your child is an independent sleeper, they're much more likely to be flexible. Okay, so
Yeah,
first of
100%.
all, and if you haven't heard our podcast, you definitely have to listen to it about being flexible and still having good sleep. That stuff all comes because it's ingrained. So that's the first thing you have to remember once you really implement those healthy habits. Now, the first advice that I have taken myself and I've given my families and my clients is you do kind of have to advocate a little bit. I will tell you right now that at least in California, I actually don't know all the regulations in all of the world, but in California, there's very specific things that you can and cannot advocate for. The first thing is that, some daycares have strict time-based schedules and not wake times for older infant rooms. When you're newborn and early infant, they usually have more of a flexibility of being able to kind of navigate your schedule a little bit. And
So
things
can I
that,
actually pause you right there,
yeah,
Mika? Because that is actually something that I think that if you're listening to this, that's actually a really good point to ask, either going into changing into a new daycare or wherever your child is. is what that daytime has to look like. Because one of the parts within our process, and for any process of sleep train, one thing that we want to try to do is get into a really good, consistent daytime routine and schedule with your little one. And so if you're trying to do something different, or that daytime is going to look different at home than it does at daycare, that's going to make that transition really hard for baby. And so we actually want to try to keep it as consistent across the board, so kind of to have that preparation piece a little bit ahead of time, just so you know. Okay, sorry, Mica, I didn't mean
That's
to
okay.
interrupt.
No,
I just want
so
to make
early
sure.
infant
Yeah.
rooms will be more accommodating. And I will tell you that I have personally, so to speak, held my child back from going into the older infant room because I knew he was not ready for a 2-nap schedule. And I wasn't going to force him there. So yeah, I was going to have him with younger babies. Again, not every parent knows when the 2-nap schedule is ready. We happen to be experts. So I knew that I told them, my advocacy was, hey, I don't really want him in that room yet. Okay. So that is another thing that you can know that you can and cannot advocate for.
Yeah.
The other thing that you can advocate for is, let's say that your child's naps are the schedule that ideally you would want to do is like wildly off. So I will give you an example. It's drove me crazy for quite a while. My child is a 7 to 6 a.m. baby, 7 p.m., 6 a.m. He sleeps 11 hours. It's wonderful on the dot. However, when you actually look at what that means for the ideal one nap, he's on a 1-nap schedule. That really should be like 11:30. Honestly, the latest, without him being really cranky, or without him, sleeping so far into the afternoon that then I'm actually cutting into his nighttime, which I don't want to do, because I know, one, I need that time with my husband, and two, that's really good sleep for him. And I had a daycare whose nap was at 1, and I tried. I was like,
okay, you guys. So Mica, actually, what has happened, because she called me and she was like, Chelsae, there's no right answer. I will, this is the daycare. This is what we feel is right. But like, there's no way.
there's no way.
There's no way he's going to get to 1 o'clock for the nap. And so, we totally feel you guys.
Yeah, we know. And you know what? Guess what happened, guys? My child had early morning wakings for quite some time because he was overtired for that first nap. So the things that I could advocate for was, hey, can my child be the very first one that you put down? Because they were waiting for lunchtime to be over. Ask questions. Can he just be the first one that you put down? Turns out that while nap time is at 1 o'clock, they actually start nap time at 12:30 because they're anticipating that the kids are needing some time. Guess what? They put my child down at 12:30 and he goes to sleep. They're like, oh my gosh, he goes to sleep instantly. Yeah, because he's
tired.
Yeah. And then and another thing that I was worried about was that he was going to sleep too far into the afternoon, which was going to eat into his nighttime. And so another thing you can and cannot advocate for, most daycares cannot necessarily wake your child. And I know that in our program, when we talk about natural sleep rhythms, we are trying to maintain the maximum amount of hours for the nighttime with the best amount of hours for the day. And sometimes you have to cap naps. They don't usually do that at daycare. They have regulations that prohibit them to. And so the things that I'll ask is, hey, I have a little sound machine attached to his cot. Can you turn it off at 2? Can you take his blanket off at 2? Well, you can't actually wake him, or those are the things that you can do. And, 80% of the time it does work and I can retain it. And then other times you have to adjust and you can control what you can control. So my son actually started a new daycare, and they do have earlier nap time, which is awesome. Now it's 12:15. So, it's a whole 45 minutes sooner, not quite his ideal. But because it's his sweet spot, he wants to sleep till 2:30.
Right.
And so ideally that means his bedtime is really 8 o'clock, which is way too late for our family. And so we're still navigating through that, but we try to find a happy medium. We put him down maybe 30 minutes later. It does cut into his nighttime, but he's still sleeping through the night. So there are
He's
things
still
that you
getting
can
that
navigate.
full, like, targeted amount of sleep. So,
Yeah. But
uh,
Chelsae, you have a story that, like, in general on the other side. So another thing that families always ask us is, okay, then they're going to fall asleep independently and they're going to do so well at home. And then once they get to daycare, they're not going to
so
follow them.
I will say this. So, I'm going to go into my story, but the one thing to also advocate for is to just share with them, saying at home, and this is a great way to pose it, you guys, because honestly, these teachers and they're incredible. Like they work so hard, and I know that there are so many out there that like truly try their very best to be as accommodating as possible. But you can say things like, impose it like at home, it works really best if we do X, Y, and Z. But then also you can share, okay, if you sing the same song to your baby before putting them down to sleep, tell your teachers about that. And then they can sing that song. I'm not even kidding you. My son's daycare provider, I said, okay, when he was a baby, I said, every night and every nap time we sing You Are My Sunshine. And you guys guarantee she sang that song to him at every single nap at daycare. And did it help? 100%. So you'd be surprised where those little suggestions can actually go a really long way for your child to carry that through that consistency.
Or it doesn't
But
have to be a song, right? We always talk about
yeah,
sleepy time
yeah,
phrase. Maybe that's
yeah.
another episode for another day. So if there's something that you say to your child right before you put them down, is really, really key. And then like the tangibles, sleep sack,
Yeah.
whatever it is, if
If they're
your
allowed to
child's
bring like a
older, a
portable
lovey.
sound machine,
Yeah.
yeah, those little things to help to kind of replicate some of that environment too is really helpful. But yeah, so like you're right. I think that as the whole daycare, you guys, they will love if they know that your child has independent sleep habits. But a lot of times they forget because there are a lot of babies or children out there that don't have that. And so, even sometimes it can take some little gentle reminders that, can you please just, have my child fall asleep on their own? And here's where my story comes in. My son's daycare is absolutely incredible. He did go through this period of time, primarily actually, Mica, when he was having a sleep regression because his language was greatly like increasing. Like it was like we talk about how like there's sleep regressions, which is another topic for another day, but it's primarily around major development, and he was incredibly developing his language. And how his sleep regressions always pop up ever since he was really little is within nap time. He would always just continuously protest naps, and that's kind of how his sleep regression came up. Well, he started to protest naps at daycare. When I say protest, I think he was actually your son's age actually at this time.
Yeah.
He was like right around like 18 months, 20 months. It's a very common time for it to happen. And he wasn't being like bad on his cot, but he started to just like kind of roll around and just like not fall asleep. And so the sweet teachers, very understandably are trying to help him to go to sleep. Well, they come, which I didn't realize at first, but they started to like fully pat him to sleep. And my little boy, who is just quick as a whip. And also, again, you guys, kids are really smart, and a lot of times you have to be a step ahead of them. He started doing some really interesting behaviors at nap time when he was at home, and I could not figure it out, like what was going on. And this is also the time that he started to try to climb out of his crib. He, at nap time, he kind of just would yell and scream. He, speaking of safe sleep environments, he, would try to grab things around his crib, even though he couldn't reach it. And I was like, what is going on? And I think, Mica, I even like said to you, I was like, what in the world, like, is happening? Like, because his sleep. And then when because his language started bursting, he was like, at one point he was like, mommy stay, mommy pat, like mommy stay, mommy pat. And I was like, what? Because Mica, we never did that. Like that was never something that like I did with him. That was like never even, I was like, so a little investigation on my part, and I like came to realize that, you know, some of the struggles that we were having at nap time was just because there was like some of that inconsistency between home and daycare. And so, but then, you know, really it's just as a matter of like a conversation, right? Like it's not something that's where you can say like, this is what we're experiencing at home. And can you try to make sure to, you know, do X, Y, and Z or not do that? And kind of just communicate in that way. So, but sorry, you guys. If you hear a little shake, I have my dog next to me, and he keeps on coming up to me. So my apologies if you're hearing that. So, Mica, do you have any kind of similar stories where you were like, "Oh gosh, like I didn't even kind of realize that that's what was happening," and then you kind of figured it out with your kiddo sleep in daycare?
I mean, the biggest one was that after asking, you do have to be an advocate. Again, these teachers have so many other kids.
Totally.
And my son is prone to early morning wakings because his natural wake up time is already at 6. So any kind of disruption, sometimes we can feel it. And then the targeted, no nap zone for us was really 2 o'clock. And sometimes I wouldn't always find out, and they'd be like, yeah, he slept till like 2. Well, then I finally started asking, like, can you be more specific about when he's waking up? Just so that, not because I'm telling them like, hey, keep doing that, you haven't done that, but then, finding a different way to then come around and change the bedtime at home. So I will tell you, at this new daycare, they are not as successful with turning off things that allow him to wake up. And so actually, on the contrary, most babies will do better at daycare naps than at home. That is actually more common. They'll say that afterwards, like, oh, wow, they're doing really well. My son does really well. He was his first day at this new place on Monday, but almost too well. So like over 2 hours for the nap. That is okay for some babies at this age. My son is 20 months. For my son, it is not okay before it takes away for nighttime. That's what I know is specific to him. And so we even just talked about it, where nap time or bedtime right now is just now always going to be at 7:30. So instead of accommodating day by day, they're doing their best. He's waking up right around 2 or 2:30, and it's just going to be that probably bedtime is going to be closer to 7:30 at home. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the biggest takeaway when we talk about daycare is that things are usually actually okay. Inconsistency at daycare usually doesn't impact either your sleep training or your ability to even retain your nights. So it is all extremely possible. And that eventually they actually do realign to what you have at home. Or they do better at daycare usually than they do at home, because guess what does not usually change? How they see their routine happen at daycare usually is way more consistent than sometimes at home, which allows them to really thrive a little bit more. So I know we're near the end of our time. So Chelsae, maybe
So
you can
let's
take it
kind of
away
go
with a
through.
few
Sorry,
tips.
guys, if you're on YouTube,
We
there's
can't,
my
we
dog.
can't hear it or anything. Yeah.
Okay, I keep on muting because my dog is like literally, you guys, just freaking out. But okay, so one of the things that we do on every single episode here is where we give 3 tangible tips and takeaways from the episode. So today, obviously, since we're talking about daycare and sleep, I'm gonna go ahead and kick us off, if that's okay, Mica, with our very first tip. And that is that keep in mind that, which I'm sure all of you do, but that, these care providers, they are working really hard and they truly care about your children and they really want to do what is best for them. And so with that in mind, a lot of times just like a quick little conversation can go a really long way. And so if there's something that comes up, do not hesitate to advocate for your child, and they want to be partners with you in that as well, more oftentimes than not. So don't hesitate to go ahead and just have a brief conversation, and also to go ahead and just to advocate for your child. And then I'm going to do my second one, Mica, and then you can hop on the third if that's okay with you. The second one is that think of 3 things that you really want your daycare to know and to try to follow. And this kind of goes to advocacy piece, but just, really think like your top 3, right? So for example, like if you can really try not to have them be awake, especially if you have a younger baby, not be awake longer than 2 hours at a time, as an example. Tell them one thing that they can try to incorporate in the nap routine. And then, something else that is really important to you, whether it's something about their feeding or, their actual like sleep space, anything like that. So just like the top 3, and that's more manageable too for the daycare as well. So what is one tip that you can send everyone with today, Mica, our third one?
The third tip, I would say, if there are things that you cannot control, you can't change within daycare, just accommodate them at home, but not on a daily basis. Just do it consistently. So if you know that 75% of the time, maybe your child is in daycare, 3 or 4 times a week, I would say maybe it's four days a week and up. You might just want to accommodate that for always. And your child will actually really align to that very well, even though you might have 2 or 3 days where things seem to be a little bit too long. That's what I would recommend. In the same way, if you feel like, they're only in daycare for 2 days, but they're at home and the schedule at home really works, what you're going to do is you're going to just try to be unchanging. And usually they do realign to that. So hope is not lost with daycare. You can still retain really good sleep. And that is what we're here for. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you. And please know, we have, if you are looking to go ahead and get some, just some change of sleep and some better sleep, our webinar, right, Mica, is a great place to go ahead and start. And you can find that in our Instagram page or on our website as well. It's always a great place to start. So I hope that you have a great weekend, Mica, and we cannot wait to see you and hear you guys on next episode. We'll talk to you really soon. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Stay rested.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Rested Mamas Talk. To stay connected and get more sleep tips from us, follow us on our Instagram page at rested_mama_happy_baby.
To find out how we're helping families around the world get better sleep, check out our website, restedmamahappybaby.com, or chat with us directly to learn more about our programs. Chat with you next time.